Be'ez Hashem, we're going to start now the other Gimel Minim. Last week we were zoicha to learn about the Esrog. Now we want to try and go through as much as we can on a very practical level when it comes to the Lulav. So here we have the Kaposh Tamarim, which, as you know, is the chelik of the pasuk that deals with the Lulav itself. The Kaposh Tamarim is obviously from the Tamarim, from the dates. And Lulav in that actually represents some incredible ideas. Lulav, Lamed Vav, Lamed Beis, Lamed Vav Tzadikim, Lamed Vav Tzadek Mesachtas and Shas. Lamed Beis, the Torah begins with a base and ends with a Lamed. So there's a lot of Kabbalistic things going on with the Lulav. And of course, we know the Medrash. I think we mentioned it last time. Where the Medrash clearly says that when Klal Yisrael walk around with their Lulav, the Lulav represents the sword. We won the war. We were Zocher in Din when it came to Yom Kippur. And now we're going to continue continue our lives with that schus. Be'ez Hashem. Lulav, the Maril says, is also Gematria Chaim, life, which also Gavalda Gazach. Now, it's interesting when the Torah tells us the Kapois Tumarim, there's always a suffix whether or not it actually has to grow from a tree that produces Tumarim or not. That's really the Shaila. The Chsam Sofer on Sukkah Lamed Daled, Reb Moshe's the Tshuva and Orach Chaim and Igros Moshe Chelik Daled. Also, whether or not the tree that the palm tree that the lulav comes from actually has to produce dates. And Reb Moshe and the Chsam Sofer both write in a similar way that the Torah does not require that, even though, as was mentioned before, you have so many things on packages nowadays. There are some lulavim that will come with a special hiddur that it comes from a tree that there are actually tamarim on it. It does not have to actually have, it's a tanai just in the min, but it doesn't have to. I will tell you, however, the Mincha Saloza from Munkach, the Tzafnas Paner, the Rogichova, they both say, many are also the same thing, Yesh Medaktikim, that those that say that you should try to get a lulav from a tree that does produce dates. But again, halacha lemaisa, a lot of our lulavim come from trees that don't, and they are 100% mahadrin mina mahadrin. Okay, so it doesn't make really a difference whether it produces dates or not. The Torah, interestingly enough, when he brings down the sugya, in fact, if you're in before actually, Rashi, on Sukkah Lamed Beis Amud Aleph, Rashi explains to us that originally the lulav starts off and originates as a hard stick, as you can see from the middle over here. And that is the hard stick that Rashi refers to. And then eventually the leaves spread out. Now that will be enough gemina for us for some of the halachas that we're going to be learning be'ezus Hashem. Now, there is a shaila, a very interesting shaila, with something that came about 100 years ago called the canary. A canary lulav. A canary lulav is, look at the lashon of Reb Moshe. Reb Moshe is in this tshuva in Orach Chaim Chelik Daled Semikuf Chav Gimel, and he writes like this: La'ani astaiti poshut ubor she'ein ze mimine lulav klal. It's not even a type of a lulav. Va'af b'di'ever ein yotzin boy. V'hu brocha levatala. Ve'elu shenodo yosef eretz Yisrael like shiras HaRav. Those people that plant them and obviously sell them. These people are machshel the rabbin v'gam mitu eiz gedoli Yisrael b'zeh. But Moshe says that Gedoli made a mistake. Umi shemoichroi, anyone that sells it lemitzvas lulav oiva belifnei ive ubegezel. That's a very, very strong lashon of Reb Moshe, and it's not only Reb Moshe that passes it. The Stipler and Orchos Rabbeinu has a similar psak. Rav Elyashiv Zatzal, Rav Chaim Kanievsky Shlita, they all held that it's 100% possible. It's interesting. Rav Vosna has a tshuva in Shevet HaLevi, and he says that lemaisa, if you made a bracha on it already, nunu, you could be mekel. Maybe you should try to get another one, but it's not mamish ma'akev. And what are the simonim? So I sat with Hagoyin Rav Israel Orbach Shlita, and he basically told me there are 4 major simonim, which many of them are not so negeya. One of them is the distance between the leaves. In other words, it's much more distant between one leaf and the next leaf. The spine is a lot softer, which basically means if you take your regular lulav, right, and many people do this when they check to see if it's straight, which we'll get to, is they hold it horizontally. Just so you can see if it goes straight. If you do that and the entire lulav sort of slopes downwards, that's one of the simonim, that's a canary. It has a smaller spine, that the leaves are coming from it and go up, but the spine itself is smaller, and there's a lot of dust between the leaves. If you have all of these simonim, you're dealing with a canary. Min hastam, the most poskim say you don't have to worry about a canary, but there's something to be makpid on. If you get it with a haksha, that's very, very important. That's a haksha that you know is reliable, because you don't want to have a problem. Because again, according to Rav Moshe, Rav Elyashiv, the stipler, it's mamash a brocha levatola, and a person is not yotza. So that is a canary. Now, we have a very important machlokes. I'm sure you've seen this in the Shulchan Aruch, Tofresh Mem Hey, very yesodistic machlokes, which we'll mention now, and obviously we'll mention it a couple of times throughout the halachas of lulav, and that is what makes a lulav pasul. So it's actually incredible, because before we start the Shulchan Aruch, you look at Rov HaEysonim, and when I say Rov HaEysonim, I'm talking about the Rif and the Rambam and the Ran and the Rosh and the Ravid and the Ramban. You've got Gedolei Rishonim that all held that as only if Rov Olim, if most of the leaves are pasul, that makes the lulav pasul, which means it's basically, according to Svardim, that's how the Shulchan Aruch paskins, almost impossible to find a lulav that is going to be pasul. In fact, somebody told me a ma'aseh this week. He's a Talmud of Rav David Feinstein, and he said to me that there was someone in the shuk in America, and I don't remember where it was and when it was, but he told me the ma'aseh that there was someone in the shuk, and he was searching for hours and hours, and he was going backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards, and all of a sudden Rav David walks in. Oh, the Shiva's here, Gavaldi, and we can ask the Gadol Hador what to do. So he goes over to Rav David Feinstein and said, Rebbe, can the Rebbe help me find, please, a lulav? So he says, sure. He sticks his hand into a box, says, hey, take it. Right? It's impossible to find a lulav that is going to be possible. Look, the Shulchan Aruch for sure comes along the Ramah, which basically is Shitas Rashi, and Rashi brings Haggai Sasmak, that it's only the Tiyomis. The Tiyomis, the middle leaf, which we will explain where that is and give you a very clear guideline to how to find that, is the one that we're looking at. The Aruch HaShulchan passes this way, and that's how most Ashkenazim go. And therefore, we look at the Tiyomis. It doesn't bother us the rest of the leaves. What bothers us is the Tiyomis when it comes to many of the halachas of Dalet Minim. And therefore, that's why Ashkenazim have to only look at that. And again, also, when you learn the halachas, it's hard to find a real pasul lulav. I wouldn't say it's hard, but it's harder. We'll get to that, Be'ez Hashem. The first thing we have to see is what we have over here, where the Gemara tells us, Gemara in Lamed Beis in Sukkah, Nifredu, over here, Kapish Tamarim, which over here we see is on the right-hand side. The lulav, as we mentioned, starts off where the leaves are packed tightly together, and then eventually they sprout out in the way that you can see from the left. So basically, the Mishnah and Sukkah Chavtes nifrudu olav is kosher, which means if the leaves are spread apart, it's 100% okay, right? It's kosher, and the Gemara learns it out from a pasuk kapois, which means it has to be roy to be tied together. If it's so spread apart that it's no longer roy to even be tied together, then it's possible. But for example, this lulav that you see, which is obviously an exaggeration of most of our lulavim, is 100% kosher because it's roy to tie it together. And therefore, it's no problem whatsoever. The Ramah, however, which you learn, tells us, mitzvah min hamuvcha b'lulav she'eino lo prudus legamri. In other words, we want to try to make sure that it's totally tightly packed together without any problems. So mitzvah min hamuvcha, for it to be nice and tight. It's one of the hidurim to look for on a lulav, but that doesn't mean during the nanuim, when you're shaking the lulav, that obviously it's going to become a little bit shaking, it's going to come apart. That's absolutely fine. It's a chelik of the mitzvah, and that's okay. But when you're holding it straight, have a look where the leaves are holding. If they're tightly packed together, that's mahadrin mina mahadrin. Now, this is obviously one of the most negea shailas that people are looking for in the lulav, and that, of course, is a Gemara in Sukkah Lamed Beis Amud Aleph that tells us nechluku atiyomis, right? Nechluku atiyomis, as we mentioned, machlokes Rishonim exactly how much, which we will get to, and it's going to be possible because Ashkenazim are going to be going with the tiyomis. So again, we've got Shulchan Aruch that holds with Rov Olim, and the Ramah that goes by the tiyomis. As we mentioned over here, as you can see clearly, that all the leaves of the lulav are made up, for those of you that are not familiar in a practical way, from two leaves that are stuck together at the back, and that is what it means. Nechlika is in the place where it's stuck, if it's split over there. Now, how do we get to the tiyomis? That's really the shaila. And I would not suggest for anyone to themselves check for themselves in this situation, because if you're going to check for tiyomis, you may end up splitting it yourself, and you don't want to do that. So unless you know what to do, it's not kedai. And therefore, the way to look for the tiyomis is to follow the spine all the way up until you reach basically what you're going to get to is 3 leaves. And then 2 of them, you've got one on the right, one on the left, and you've got the middle one. That's the tiyomis, right? You can see it clearly a little bit from over here, right? If you follow up, if you can see, you've got over here the spine, and you're following it all the way up, and you end in this area over here, where you end with 3 leaves that are normally one next to the other. You've got one on the right, one on the left, and you've got the middle one. That's very simple to see. There's obviously a shaila, what happens if you have 2 tiyomisim, whether or not you need both of them to be kosher 100%, or one of them is enough. A lot of poskim do not like. There were many times when I was doing shimush, they didn't like the idea of having 2 tiyomisim because it's hard to have them both exact and perfect. But if you've got 1 tiyomis, that is the only leaf that we're looking for. It's the only one that, according to Ashkenazim, we're going to be looking, and therefore, according to Shulchan Aruch, we're going to be looking at rove of the leaves. According to Ramah, again, we're only going to be looking at the tiyomis. Now, there are 3 mahalchim when it comes to a tiyomis. You can have a case where it's basically all, or at least mostly split. You can have partial, which is probably more nageya, and then you can have perfection, which is no split whatsoever. If you're ever in the shuk and someone screams out, brisk lulav, that's what it means. It means 0 split, 100% sholem ad hasoif. That is obviously the most mahadrin min mahadrin to get. And it's actually interesting because last week we talked about the esrog. And we talked about the idea that it has to be near a lane of. In other words, it has to be in a situation that I basically see it in a normal way. Why is it over here I have to look at it with a magnifying glass and it makes a difference? And the answer is, says the Ran, is because the rosh of the lulav is opposite your eyes. And therefore the esrog you're holding down, it's keneged halev, it's keneged the heart, you don't see it so much. That's the distance of psul. When you see something, that will be a problem if it's from that distance. Whereas the lulav, since, says the Ran, the lulav, the top of the lulav is opposite my eyes. Therefore, what I want to do is I want to make sure that it is perfect, and that's why we're much more makpid on the top of the lulav than the other places over there. That's why it is problematic. By the way, most learn that the machloikes of nechluku, the psul, is actually a din of psul of hadar. Even though the Magen Avraham learns it's lekicha tama, the HaEysonim and the Mishnah Berurah Halacha L'Maisa learns it's a din of hadar, which basically means it's possible, and therefore it's going to be problematic. How much makes it possible? So this is very important to remember, because again, most people have said, oh, if it's split, then it's possible. It's not true. You look at the Ramah, and at least how even the Marshal, the Amshel Shloimeh, the Vilna Gaon, and others learn, it's at least all Rov. If it's under Rov, it's kosher, which you see from the next one. If it's miktsas, which according to Taz is up to a tefach, and even the Mishnah Berurah holds under Rov, now that's a lot of the leaf. As long as it's under Rov, it's 100% kosher. Which means, like I said before that it's hard to find the lulav that's possible. I can imagine some of you are like, whoa, what does that mean? What do I mean? It's is only 1 leaf. I picked up many lulav that it's split. You're right. But again, me'ikadin, according to the Taz at Tefach, according to the Vilna Gaon and the Mishnah Berurah, as long as you've got under Rov, under 50%, it's 100% halachically kosher. Whereas, a mitzvah min hamuvcha, as we know, the Ramah tells us, shelo nechlaka onin klal, and therefore, because of that, it's interesting. I wrote it down over here. You can see the bottom line. According to the Taz, less than a tefach, there's no even mitzvah. The Taz, if it's less than a tefach split, there is no mitzvah to get another lulav. It's 100% fine. So I want to make life easy, Rabbi Sai. This year, as we mentioned last week, is a durabonon. We hope a mitzvah Shem will be a deraisa. But in case it turns it's still a durabonon, we should know this. If chas v'shalom, you bought your lulav, the kid plays with it. Oy vavoy, what do I do now? Go mishiga, go and finding other ones. And if you can easily find another one, you should try to get the mitzvah min hamuvcha from the Ramah. But if you don't, or if in the middle of Yom Tov something happened, and it's mamash right before Shachris, I'm going to miss this month, whatever, it's 100% no problem whatsoever. But of course, we try to look one for which is as shalom as we can. Now, this is an interesting one. Are you allowed to glue the lulav that split? What's the shaila? Comes along the Ritva. The Ritva learns what's the psul of a lulav that split, even if it's not fully split. What's the problem? Why do I need a mitzvah min hamuvcha? It's good. What's the problem? Abaya, Rubai, Kikulai, all of these halachas. Says the Ritva, that if it's basically split, it's got a din like it's fully split. Comes along the Marsham. The Marsham in Chuvas brings down that he says that we know by Hilchos Rosh Hashanah, there's a halacha by the shofar, that if the shofar is cracked, then it's a problematic thing, which means there's a way of doing it. Someone just showed me a shofar today, and you dunk it into water, you see if the crack lets water in, whatever. The halacha is you're allowed to glue a crack in a shofar, as long as it's not going to ma'akev on the voice. I don't want to go into Nehul for shofar, but that's what it is. Whereas, the same thing, says the Marsham, should apply over here. If the whole problem is, according to the Ritva, that if it's partially split, we're worried that it's going to get more split, so glue it. And according to the Marsham, it's absolutely fine. And not only the Marsham, Reb Shlomo Zalman, the Maisa Paskin this way, Dain Fisher Paskin this way, with Yashav Paskin this way, and the Makar is in Tov Kuf Pei Vov by Hilchos Shofar, the Ran, and the Ritva, and that's Sugya, and they bring it over here. Okay? So that is, again, I've never seen any Rav ever tell anyone to do this. I'm not practically suggesting that you do this, but I just want to mention it, the Torah Limud, that it be'etzem would work. Now, let's talk about the Korah. Korah is a very interesting one, because there are a lot of people that run around and they actually want to have the Korah. So what is this Korah? So it's interesting, it's actually mentioned in the Beis Yosef, and the Beis Yosef Rishon asks, is it kosher? And he says it's absolutely kosher lechatchila. We have no chashash, says the Beis Yosef, that it's possible on the inside. In fact, they bring down that the Chazon Ish would already use it until he heard that the Brisker Rav was makbid, then he changed his mind. Rabbi Zril Orbach Shlita told me that Rabbi Yosef Chaim Zonenfeld, the Rav of Yerushalayim, would also use it because he held it was stronger. But until he heard that the Brisker Rav also, he decided not to. But Rabbi Zril Orbach told me that even though the Meiser it's kosher 100%, but at the end of the day, we're worried that our lulavim are not the way they used to be, and therefore because of that, we're choshesh that something's going on inside, and because of that, many gedolim will makbid dafka to get without the korah, because you want to check to make sure inside is 100% good. Now, there's another reason as well, and that is al pi a Bikur Yaakov, the Orech Laner, and that is because when you Klal Yisrael do the nanuim, the shakings, so we want to make sure that it shakes. When you've got the korah there, now remember, Sfardim don't need to do that. I don't want to go into it right now, but Sfardim have a bit of a mahalach in the nanuim, that they don't have to shake it in the way that Ashkenazim do, they just move it. But the way that the Ashkenazim do it, I'll be the Taz, whatever, is in a way that actually shakes. When you've got the korah there, it's not going to shake. And therefore, because of that, it's another reason why it should not get one. But be very, very careful. Never remove it yourself. Ask the moicha to remove it for you, because it can break. And even on Yom Tov, there's a shaila of tikkun mona makeh patish by removing it, which is why a person should not remove it himself in that way. But again, generally, you can't say it's possible with the korah, it's probably kosher, but many people are makbid because of these chashashim that we said previously. Now, when it comes to Yovish, the psul of Yovish is a psul which we know is already mentioned in the Mishnah. It's basically not negeya. Well, the difference between the left picture and the right picture, it means it turns white. It turns white. That means if you wanted to use the Rebbe's or the Rosh Hashiva's lulav from last year with all his kavaldiga brachas and ashpa on there, not kedai, because from last year it will go white, and therefore because of that, a person should not. But of course, there's a hiddah for a person to have it green, and it should be totally green. Now, one of the shilas that's nageya is a very interesting one. It's very unclear from this picture. I apologize, but very often on the top of the lulav, you've got burnt parts. In other words, the tip of the lulav sometimes is either brown or reddish. The reason for that is a practical reason, because the top of the lulav is subject to more of the sun's rays, and therefore it just gets burnt by the sun. The Chazon Ish paskins that it's 100% fine. There's Shlomo Zalman paskin this way. But again, of course, Medaktikim would try to get one that is green all the way to the top. Moving on. Next psul, Mishnah in Sukkah Chavtes Omid Beis, Nektam Roshai, right, which is posel afilu b'mashu, and this is where the magnifying glass comes in, and that is because, again, of Shitas Haran, that the top of the lulav is connected the eyes of a person, it needs to be perfect. And that's why afilu b'mashu, something which we have not have said by the Yesrug, is going to be nageya by the lulav. What's the problem? Rashi, Masechta Sukkah, tells us the issue is it's not Hodar, which means Nektam Roshay is a psul all 7 days of Yontov. Machlokes Rishonim exactly what it means. Of course, we paskin that it means the Tiyomis. The most Rishonim go with what I wrote over here. That's Posla Filu B'Mashu, the Ritva, the Ran, Magid Mishnah, and of course the Vilna Gaon, the Achronim, the Levush, the Kuriyaka, the Orach Laneh, the Shulchan Aruch HaRav, the HaEysonim, of course the Mishnah Berurah, which is why we are Machmed, the Shita Saran, as we mentioned, the Lashon of the Ran is Rosh Shalulav, Kechaytmoi Shalesrug. That the head of the lulav is like the chaytem, where it slopes up of the esrog, the most important part of the esrog. That's where this is over here. That's why we've got to be very, very careful. Okay, just agav, before we move on to that one, the magnifying glass on the left is one of the ways how you'll see Rabbonim checking is the look as a vertical view, not something that an untrained eye can see. Baruch Hashem, I was zocher to do Shimish by Mordechai Friedlander Zatzal, one of the primary Talmidim of Rav Yashiv, and one of the first Rabbonim who went to Zupnik over here in Geula, the big shuk. If you come to Eretz Yisrael, I'm sure you've been over there. He's one of the first Rabbonim, and he trained me in Daled Minim, and he showed me how to do this with a magnifying from a vertical view. You can see very clearly it is Nektar Moshe, but again, it's something that a Rav has to see, otherwise an untrained eye can't see it. Something that people get confused is a hemnuk. A hemnuk means something very different to nechlaku, which is very, very important. First of all, I do want to mention as well something else as well. If you have a suffix with this, with a suffix in the case of nektam roshai, then pashtus, a lot of poskim are going to be machmir. Now let's move on to hemnuk. Hemnuk is not nechlaku. Nechlaku was it's split. Hemnuk means it's not really split. I mean, it is a little bit, but it's such a small amount that als nechlaku, it's not a problem. But there's a new halacha. It's a Gemara in Sukkah Lamed Beis, and that if it's a hemnuk, it's possible. What's a hemnuk? So Rashi says a kli shel sofrim. It means what we call in England, and I think in America you call it the same thing. It's a compass. A compass is basically, it's like a two-pronged thing. You put the pencil in one end, and it's got like a little pointing thing, and you draw circles with it. So Mordechai Friedlander Zatzal told me that when he asked Rav Yashiv, can Rav Yashiv give me an example of a hemnuk? Rav Yashiv went like this. In other words, he pointed the fingers in different directions, not split, right? It could also be split, but this is such a small amount you can see from the diagrams, is not a problem, especially that you can see from here, from the chart on the bottom of the Ritva, from the Bialocha, afilu b'mashu. It's a small amount, but if the leaves are going in different, this is a very common psul, that the leaves are going in different directions, even if als nechlaku, it's not a problem, but it still will be a problem of a hemnuk, and therefore a person has to be very, very, very looking out carefully to make sure that even if, all right, it's not so split, it's okay, it's way under a tepach, I'm good. But if it's a hemnuk, it's going to be possible. This is another one, kneppel. A kneppel is basically, it's a Yiddish, for bent over. So you look at the one, it's very interesting, I don't know if you've ever done this, but you take two lulavim to a rav, so whatever it is, someone who knows, and you show to him, what do I do? This one or this one? And he looks at this one, he looks at that one, he says, this one. You're like, why? Well, it looks exactly the same to me. Teretz is, one of them sometimes is slightly bent over, like you see from the picture on the right. Why? Why is that better? Why is this a mile? Isn't it nice if it goes all the way up? And the answer is, because if it goes over, it's clearly not nektam rosha. It's 100% sholem adasoif, and therefore it's good. Whereas the one on the left is a little bit of a machlokes, whether or not we take it or not. They say the stipler would take two lulavim, that one with straight and one with a bissel of a kneppel, to be yaitza the shita of the rosh, because the rosh brings down that a kneppel is better, because this way you've got no problem of nektam roshai, but the picture on the right is already pointing downwards, then that's not shalai kederach kidulai, and therefore that's already a shaila, which a lot of poskim are machmeh, but the minig is to be makel. And that's one of the hidurim of a lulav, which I think is pretty obvious, is we try, the Gemara tells us okum kamagel, but that's not really negaya so much. Okay, as long as it's straight, it's 100%, even if it's slightly bent, it's going to be okay. Excuse me. Okay. The way to test it is obviously to hold it horizontally, and then you're okay. The size of the lulav, right? Not so negaya. Most of our lulavim of the zicham, way more than dalat tvachim from the spine. Obviously, that's how you measure it. These are the different measurements that we have. It's generally not going to be negaya because most of our lulavim definitely fulfill that these measurements. That's okay. Okay. Let's move on to the next min. We've done 2 of them.
Weisenfeld, for some reason, if I may add, the Balabatim seem to think that a longer lulav is better. Is there any in that anywhere?
Yes, absolutely. There's a Magen Avram. The Magen Avram is over here in Hilchos Lulav, and it's actually a Magen Avram that people use in many, many places. People use it for Hilchos Mezuzah. People use it for Hilchos Chanukah. Is something that is bigger, larger, taller, standing. Is that something that's more of a hiddah? Magen Avram says yes. Which is the shaila by Chanukah. What does that mean? Longer candles, is that necessarily a hiddur? Because it's not a hiddur in the Eish. By mezuzah, for sure, there's a hiddur in that. And by lulav, there is definitely a hiddur. We know that because if anyone's seen the pictures of Reb Chaim Kanievsky Shlita, you often see him with an absolute huge. In fact, he has a special place in the shul to stand to be able to cope with the lulav that he has. And it's Al Pi Magen Avram in Hilchos Lulav that says it's more muhuda to have a bigger one. So it's true. If you have 2 lulav in front of you, both of them are gorgeous, but one of them happens to be taller, there's no question that a taller one is definitely better. But if the smaller one has a bigger hiddur in the nechelku, in the hemnuk, in the nektam, whatever it is, then for sure, obviously that one would win over a hiddur of larger because that's a hiddur in halacha. Whereas this is just beautification. There is definitely a makar for that. Okay, moving on, we'll talk about the Heilige Hadassim. The Heilige Hadassim, Anaf Eitz Ovois, that's where it comes from in the pasuk, which the Gemara explains Anaf Eitz, Anaf Biv Choyfin Es Eitzav. A very interesting thing. It sounds like what we're looking for, Chazal are telling us, is we want the leaves to actually cover the branch. Which, halachic lemaisa, if the leaves look something like this, they're spread out, it is absolutely kosher without any problem whatsoever. There is an interesting Shari Tshuva. The Shari Tshuva brings a Yaivitz that says what happens if you have the leaves where they're not as, in other words, the top of one row doesn't reach the bottom of the row that's on top of it. So the Yaivitz holds its puzzle, but most poskim hold that is 100% kosher. But overlapping each other is 100%. Oh, there's more of a hiddur for a person to have the Koryakov, the Orchaneh, the Chazon Ish say that the more tight the Hadassim are, and again, this is something to look out for when you're choosing your Hadassim, is to make sure that the leaves are overlapping each other and for sure overlapping the actual stick, as we saw before. In other words, something like this, again, is it kosher? 100%. But you're definitely looking for something like this, where you basically can't see the stick. It's a hiddah. If it's open like this, it's 100% kosher. But it's definitely better to get ones that are more packly in there. There's no hiddah, by the way, just to mention this, not Negeya, but Rav Elyashiv brought down that there's no hiddah to take Hadassim with any smell whatsoever. No hiddah bit halal. Moving on to the inyan of Meshulish. Let's talk about Meshulish, because obviously this is one of the most Negeya shailas. Anaf Eitz Ovois, obviously we're talking about braided. Braided means that you have a continuous, like a chain. And if it's like a chain, this is the Gemara in Pesukah, on the base, where we learn. Now, there's a major machoikus rishonim, as you can see, how to learn this. Is it the leaf or is it the stem? As we will see. So again, the Gemara in Sukkah on the base tells Ovois, the pasuk, means the Meshulish. What does that mean? Comes along Rashi. And Rashi says, what Meshulish means? It means that all 3 leaves are coming from exactly the same spot. Not the same level, but the same sprout. Shitas Rashi. Comes along Tosfos, and Tosfos says, Rashi, you're making problems for Klal Yisrael. There's no way that anyone's going to have a kosher Hadassim. Who's going to find it? Somebody told me last year that if someone came to Reb Chaim Kanievsky, they found a branch of Shitas Rashi Hadassim. Okay, at Shiyov finished. Don't know. But Tosfos is made that it's come out not Negeya to find such a thing. Right? That's why Hadassim are hard to come by. Right? I can't remember who it was, but one of the Brisker Rabbonim came once into shul on the first day of Yom Tov with 2 Hadassim. Somebody said, Rebbe, 2 Hadassim, don't we need 3 Hadassim? He said, what can I do? I only found 2 that were kosher. I didn't find the 3rd one. So people pasha, there are people that have been spending time since Hanukkah already looking for Hadassim. Shitas Tosfos holds as long as they're on the same level. What does that mean? You could see already from here, the machoikus rishonim, Tosfos, the Rosh, the Ritva, whether or not exactly how much you need and how far it has to go. But what we do know is we know that the Gemara calls this one a Hadash Shaita. A hadashoita because you've got one of the leaves that's clearly on a different level totally than the other two. This is called a hadashoita, and a hadashoita is not good. Comes along the Chazon Ish. Gewaltige Chazon Ish. By the way, interesting. The Ritva learns Pshat in the Gemara. When the Gemara says it's a hadashoita, it's possible. Why? Says the Ritva, it's weird. It's a shaita, it's weird. And therefore we don't want to do that, and therefore that's not good. Came along the Chazon Ish with the gewaltige Kula. He bases it on Mishnayos that comes along the Chazon Ish and says like this. If you've got one, like the right-hand side, right, that's what we call briska hadassim. I don't know if you've ever seen this, right? I don't know if it came to America yet, but in Eretz Yisrael, you could buy packages, not only as the Rav said before, with different achsherim, but briska hadassim. What's the mile? I don't know, but it could be the mile is that you've got this right-hand side one. It's exactly equal. If you find hadassim with this, that means the entire share of the hadassim is exactly equal. I imagine each stick of hadassim will cost you $100 because those are incredible. If you've got one like the left, where the leaves are starting from different places completely, that's a hadashoita, that's possible. It's the middle one that most of our hadassim fit into, and that's kosher. Why? Came along the Chazon Ish and said that as long as, if I would take a string and I would basically go around with the string and meet the place that emerges from all three and it touches all three, then it's not a hadashoita, and therefore it's okay. So take, for example, over here. You could see clearly over here, you've got what, and again, I'm not sure how clearly you can see the screen, but these ones, are pretty much on an equal level. If I would take a red string to make it clear and go around it, and it would meet all of, not the leaves, but the stem of each of the three leaves on that level, then it's 100% good. And that's how the Chazon Ish paskind, and that's why you see, even in this picture, where this one starts a little bit lower than this one, but if I would take a red string and wrap it around, it would be kosher. Then it would be 100% kosher according to the Chazon Ish. It's absolutely fine. In fact, the Shevet HaLevi, Ravosna, and this is, by the way, what I've sat by Rabbonim for many years and many, many hours before Yom Tov. Most Rabbonim will not take shilos of Hadassim. Don't come to me with 3 Hadassim or 6 or 10 and say, can the Rav check, all the different levels? It's going to take hours and hours just to take Hadassim. We can't do that. What do they do? What do they say, Mechon? What are all the packages that you see? What do they say, Mechon? So the answer is they're soymech on Ravosna, which is many, many Gedolei Poskim, which is basically that if you look at it, like we said by the lulav and the esrog, for sure by the esrog, from a normal distance, you turn it around and it looks to you obvious, it looks like it's braided. Basically, all three are coming from the same sprout without scrutinizing it and taking a magnifying glass. That's 100% fine. You got yourself kosher, 100 minimum, 100 hadassim, and that's what most of the packages are being soymech on. Kach omaliyah going to
really? The package is soymech on best it's okay?
It's absolutely impossible for anyone to tell me that the hundreds of thousands of packages that are being sold around the world, many of them are coming from Eretz Yisrael, that they're shipping all over the world, that there is someone going over every single one from the top all the way to the bottom. I challenge anyone to try
So
it.
how can they charge $40? That was last year's price. How can they charge $40 and write on it Muhuda with 4 sherim? How can they do that if it's just a...
Because it could be that they had a few people do it. And you'll see that on the packages that they will tell you this has been checked by 2 people, by 3 people, by 4 people. And again, it doesn't necessarily, I don't want to puzzle everyone.
But that some of them are checked by nobody. That's what you're saying, basically.
No, it's been checked. Meaning like this, again, I don't want to puzzle anyone. Maybe there's a hachsha out there. I'll get an email in a few minutes saying, how could you say that? Maybe there's a hachsha out there that the Intaka hire thousands of people and then mamash go. It takes a long time. You're going through an entire stick and you're checking 1, 2, 3, 4. It takes time. You've got hundreds of thousands of packages going around the world.
You need Rive, correct? So
you need Rive, but even Rive.
So they check the first 4, the first 5, right? That's Rive.
They may check each one. In other words, each stick may have gone past a set of human being eyes, but they didn't go 1, 2, 3 through every row and every level of every single stick. They pick up the stick, they turn it around. Again, Ravosna Shevet HaLevi Paskins, it's Mahadrin, Mina Mahadrin. If you look at it, and to the naked eye, it looks gavaldik, it looks obvious, then it's kosher. Just
But it's
like
not different than going to Machniud and picking it out of the thing and looking kosher. It's nicht besser with them, correct?
If you know what you're doing. If you know what you're doing, maybe these people have a
No,
trained
I'm saying
eye.
I don't have to know what I'm doing. I'm saying just look at it and then this is, and I
If
see
you know
what's
that, but yeah, in other words, as long as you know the halacha that we just said about a hadashota and the kula of the Chazon Ish, which everyone follows. I mean, well, maybe there are people out there that don't go with the Chazon Ish, but like I said, the ones that don't go with the Chazon Ish,
the briskers don't go with the Chazon Ish.
Right. For me, the Chazon Ish is guns fine. Roy Klal Yisrael held up the Chazon Ish. It's yeah, you can definitely, again, like I'll just quote you some of the poskim that bring it down. In fact, Rav David Soloveitchik brings from Reb Chaim, that Reb Chaim held that way. So it could be nowadays the briskers are more machmir. That could be. I remember Rav Dunna came from England and he gave a share in about matzah before Pesach, and he said we would never touch the brisker of matzahs. That's how machmir we are. We're so machmir that if we saw the brisker of the way he made his matzahs, we wouldn't touch it. Because we've got this chomer, we've got that chomer. This is Klal Yisrael. We say that we don't want to be motzilaz on Klal Yisrael. Klal Yisrael is gewaldig. But upon him, Rav David Soloveitchik said b'shem Reb Chaim that he was maskim to the sheet of the Chaim. He had the same halakha of the Chazon Ish. Rav Shlomo Zalman paskin this way. Rav Yasher Zatzal. They all paskin in the same way. It's mahadrim and a mahadrin. And the Gedoli paskin Rav Hela Zatzal, which is one of the biggest Rikiim and Dalit Minim, and many others as well, held that this Shevet HaLevi is Mahadrin, Min Mahadrin, it's Mukubal and Klal Yisrael, and that's what most people are saying. So you're not being gypped, you're not being cheated in any way, shape, or form. It could be that someone had to pick it up, turn it around, look at it, put it down. The next one, it took him a couple of minutes, and therefore he put it in. So it does take time, and that costs money. It went past the human eye, and that costs money. So again, Chas v'Shalom, Klal Yisrael are paying for their mitzvahs. It's worth it. It's gavaldik, but everything's relative, and you have to know what you're dealing with. So again, as we mentioned, how Nick and Misholosh has to be, we talked about it doesn't have to go with a magnifying glass, and that is that. The leaves, one leaf is taller than the other. That's not a hadashota. Hadashota doesn't go with the leaves. It goes where it emerges in the stem. How much has to be Misholosh? So, okay, Shulchan Aruch, Ramah, you've seen this, that it's not ma'akev as long as you've got roiv, but lemitzvah, kuloi of the shear. Not kuloi of the whole stick, but kuloi of the shear, which we'll get to in a moment. The mitzvah, the whole shear should have to be misholosh. Which, by the way, it's a machloikis, the Mishnah Berurah and the Shulchan Aruch HaRav. Is it roiv of the stick, or is it the amount of the konim, which we're not going to go into because that's already getting complicated. And where does the roiv have to be? So the roiv could be anywhere. There's a hida for the roiv to be misholosh dafka at the top. That's what it is. And in fact, many poskim hold you could use siruf, which means if you by mistake cut off one of the leaves, so now you've got a problem because there's not masholosh right bang smack in the middle, you could still be mitzvah at the top and the bottom without any problem over there. Yovesh, by the way, I know
what goes, I got the Rav showed a picture a moment ago of a curved hadas. Is there any Indian to have the hadas perfectly straight?
Like this?
Yeah. Is there any Indian?
Ba'alma. Not mentioned in any, I don't remember seeing being mentioned in any of the halachas, but I would say it's a hiddah, like everything else is a hiddah, straight, musudah, nice, but if you get a beautiful hadassim that's slightly got a little bit of a curve in it, that's absolutely fine. That's not a problem. Let's move on to where were we? The siruf we spoke about. Yavish, the Mishnah Berurah, by the way, says Ein zeh motzi klal b'hadassim shegolu b'shana zu, which means if you have the same hadassim the whole Yom Tov, even if you forgot to put it in the fridge or if you got to put it in your shmata, whatever it is, and it goes a bit crunchy, a bit dry, it's not yavish of Chazal, and therefore it's 100% kosher. Do you want to change it because you want a more mahuda one? Okay, that's up to you. That's everyone.
Is it more mahuda? Is it more mahuda if it's wet? Is it more mahuda?
Of course it's more mahuda, 100%. It's more mahuda to have one that's fresh, green, geschmack, nice. Like everything else, we prefer to have a fresh schnitzel as opposed to one that was 2 days old that we heated up in the oven. We all understand that everything that's fresh, that looks nicer, is better. So it's a hiddah. It's a hiddah like all the other small hiddurim. Not a hiddah that's brought down in halacha, but it is a hiddah that is just nice. It's nice that a person, if he wants to do it,
wouldn't apply to a hadas, that it looks good, looks mishum, whatever. It doesn't apply here.
No, because that's not ali de shima. That's because you left it out in the sun. You forgot to put it in the fridge. The esrog is because the holding, and the nanuim, because the din of the esrog is meant to be held. And that's why the Chassam Sofer only says it on an esrog. It doesn't say it by the other gimel minim. Nektam roishai, which we learned by lulav, has basically the same idea as well. This is the Mishnah, where the Mishnah tells us, Lamadalad base, that Nektam roishai, And Lemaisa, it's kosher, but Tov Lahachmed, the Shulchan Aruch Tofish Membav Siv Yud, tells us that Lemaisa, it's 100% kosher. What's the reason? By lulav, we said, Afilu b'mashu is possible, over here it's okay. Tov Lahachmed, but Mekadin it's kosher. What's the nafkamina? The nafkamina is because, say the Rishonim, is because you don't see it. Because the leaves cover it, because they're going up, you basically don't see the roshay of the hadassim, and therefore because of that, it's not going to be a problem of nektar roshay, and that's why it is okay. Again, the Ramah says, Tov la'achman, the Shulchan HaRav, Sukkot Yudalev, also says, if you can get another one, then definitely you should, and that does not apply to Noshra Ha'olah, which means, and this is very negaya, we'll talk about this more by the Aravas. If you put it in a koshikol, which is the minig of Klal Yisrael, from those that have that minig, sometimes it can, if you put it in, you take it out, it can rip off some of the leaves. That is not a problem of nektam. It's not a problem. But again, the Chaim or Bracha and others want to say mitzvah and a muvcha to take one that has absolutely got none of the leaves. So again, this is another thing to look for when you're looking for hadassim. Obviously, being careful of putting them into the koshikol, which we will talk about. Now, when we talked about the hadassim, again, I don't want to go too much into this because everyone, has the Shum over here, the Chazon Ish, Reb Moshe, Reb Chaim No. Reb Moshe says that as long as you have roiv, which is 6 inches, then you are okay. Others hold not that way, but whatever it is, most of our hadassim are going to be okay. Let's move on. The Heilige Aravas, and I want to give you a little bit of a hagdom, if I may, when it comes to Aravas, and I say this every time I speak about Haravas. Aravas, those of you that remember from a few years ago in the Yarchei Kala, I mentioned this as well there, because I think this is very chashuv. I believe that Aravas are a meis mitzvah. Poshet meis mitzvah. Well, a meis mitzvah is a mitzvah that is a meis Rahman Litzlan that's lying there. Nobody's looking after it. Never. We have to look after this one. When it comes to the Aravas have the same thing. Why? Because it seems to be, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but this is what I've seen over the years, that when it comes to the Aravas, people are when it comes to the Hadassim, and it comes to the Lulav, of course, and the Esrog, people are very, very makpid. Oh, that's got to look like this. It's got to be azoy. You got to go checking it. When it comes to Aravas, it's like a lucky dip. You stick your hand into the garbage can, into the black bag that they get. It's got full of Aravas. You take that one. Yeah, shkoyach, I'll take this Aravas. Or a friend of yours going, do me a favor, pick me up some Aravas. Who's looking at Aravas? It's not true. A person should look into it. A person should check into it. It's very, very important. Aravas is one of the Dalad Minim. And if this one is not good, it makes the ganze mitzvah a bissel schwach, which is a chaval. Mamash a chaval. Okay? So let's talk about it a little bit. First of all, the Gemara tells us in Sukkot Amadalit, what's an Arava? How do we know what the Aravas are? Arvei Nachal, Shkoyach. What does that mean? Does it actually have to come from a nachal? No, it doesn't have to come from a nachal. Once again, you'll find packets that say, these Aravas come from a place right by the nachal. They're mamash mahadrim and a mahadrim. Is there a hiddah? Not really. It's a min, like we said by the lulav, the chasam soifa. It doesn't have to have tomorrow. It was a simon that the Torah gave us. Same thing over here. So the Gemara gives us 3 simonim. Ton Rabban, Eiza Rav. Number 1, kana shala adam, red. We'll see. Ba'ala shala moshach, we'll see. Or pia cholot. These are the 3 simonim. So the first one is kana shala adam, right? That the branch is red, and that's a hiddah. That's a very big hiddah. Now, a lot of the aravas that you'll pick up will have, you'll see both. You'll see ones with orangey, reddy, green, brown, and then you'll see ones with the regular green. They're both 100% kosher. The Taz, the Beis Yosef already says that it's absolutely fine, even if it's green, but there is a hiddah to get aravas with a little bit of a tingy red, brownish sort of stem. It's in the simon of the Gemara that it's kosher, and it's definitely a hiddah. Is it possible? 100% not if it's green. It's good if it's green, but it's a hiddah to look one if it's red. Ba'ala shalom moshach, most of our aravas are going to have this simon. That's not a problem. It's not a tzaftzipah of the Gemara, and therefore it's okay. Nektar Moshe. So Nektar Moshe is a shaila over here, just like it's a shaila with Hadassim and the Lulav, and therefore, that's why a person should be careful. It's interesting that there was a whole kuntras that came out from Lakewood, and the kuntras name was, I don't remember, Ha'ima Rava Shalcha Kosher, something like that. He wanted a taina that if you don't have the level of on the top, here you can see clearly from this picture, if you don't have the little strand, it's not a leaf, it's a strand that comes up from the branch itself. That's the lelev is not there. It's going to be a shaila of psul, and therefore it's not good. Most poskim held nishtazoi, and therefore it's okay. It's not a problem, and that's how most of the poskim go with. You don't have to have a level. If it's maybe a hither to try and have one with one, then you know for sure it's 100% good. But otherwise, it's okay. Now, Nosru Olav. This is something that's so common. People are busy taking in and out the dalet minim from the kosher gold. Got to be very, very careful when you put it in and you take it out. The kosher gold is a gewaltige Zach. Make sure the Eitzer is to squeeze it from both ends. That expands it. Put it in slowly. It's a chaval to spend so much money on dalet minim and you end up with b'diavad because you lost most of your leave without even realizing it because it's in the kosher gold. So the halacha is a Shulchan Aruch and Tophesh Mem Zayin basis. If you've got roiv that are off, it's possible. That one's probably not so negeya. But the Magen Avraham, Shulchan Aruch, HaRav, Mishnah Berurah say tov lechatchila that you shouldn't have that. And the Berkuri Yaakov, the Aruch Haneh, afinu ola, even one leaf off within the sheh, of course, within the sheh is not lechatchila. So again, chaval. You spend a fortune on the esrog, a lot of money on the lulav, a little bit less on the adasim possibly, and on the arovas, no. But to have a b'diavad instead is a big chaval. A person should be careful and to make sure when you put it in and out, it's okay. Yovesh, so most of the arovas that we have from this year will not be a problem of Yovesh. There is some soifa, some soifa where he talks about Ner Chanukah, to have the little floating wicks, to change the wicks every day, because that's what it did in the Beis HaMikdash. But on Kaponim, as the Chashiva Shabbai. So there are many people, brought down already, Mishnah Berurah says how many are people that every single day do change the arovas, but you don't have to. Even if you leave them for a few days, if you keep them properly, you can use them on Gansi Yontov if you use them properly. Once they get very, very shvach, again, are they kosher? 100%. But maybe that's more of a hiddur by the arovas than by the hadasim to make sure that they look decent. Yovish means they turn white. It's kamat, not nageya. This is a very interesting one. It comes from a Magid Mishnah. The Magid Mishnah wants to say that if the leaves are drooping down and it's roiv of them, it's actually possible. Why is it possible? Because it's shaloi kederech gedulai. That's not the way that they grow. The Magen Avraham paskins like this Rabbi Magid, and he says it's possible. As I paskin the Magen Avraham. However, you have to know that a lot of the poskim say nowadays it's different. The Chazon Ish, for example, has a whole mahalach, which Shlomo Zalman paskins like this, and that's why you see many of the Gedolim pictures with Gedolim with arovas, especially in Eretz Yisrael. The Eretz Yisrael ones are very, very shvach, and they droop down from the second you put them in and take them out the packaging, whereas the Shotzer ones you get from America, whenever those ones are starker, I would definitely suggest, if you can, well, you're in America, as you definitely can, but for us in Eretz Yisrael, we're hoping that we're going to get them this year. They're definitely here. They may be a little bit more expensive, but it's definitely kedai. They look more choshev, they're healthier, they stay out straight, they're 100% good. But even if it droops down, even to feed this Magen Avraham, the Maiset also chayadim and the Taz, but the many poskim held that it's absolutely fine because this is Kedera Kedula. So if you look at the way arovas grow, they don't necessarily grow pointing up. They grow some of them drooping in all sorts of directions, and therefore there is no problem whatsoever. The share of arovas, again, not so negeya, because most of our arovas that we're going to be buying has no problem whatsoever. So therefore the share is generally going to be okay. All right, so that finishes off the halachas